everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our 5th webinar in the Hearts HR webinar series. And today we're going to talk about our top 5 tips for developing a workplace where creativity and innovation thrive. So joining me today is Brady McCulloch from Spacecubed. He's the founder and managing director of Spacecubed. But before Brady introduces himself, let's just go through. So, introducing everyone today. So, I'm Jessica and I'm the manager of the Employee Relations Consulting team at CCI and have had the pleasure of hosting 3 of the webinars in this series. And joining me is Brady, who is the managing director of Spacecubed. Hi, Brady.
Hi, Jess. How are you?
Did you want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself and your background and Spacecubed as well?
Yeah, so I've got a degree in marketing management and e-business and worked overseas for a cruise line company, Holland America Line, as marketing manager for about 5 years. Moved back to Perth about 4 years ago and was looking at, how do we support entrepreneurs and innovators and people coming up with new ideas to tackle big social, environmental and economic challenges. And through that process really saw a gap in the support in WA for how we were supporting entrepreneurs and innovators to tackle some of those big changes. And through that process started to work with Stockland, so a big property group, around basically building a space that would lower the barrier for startups and entrepreneurs to get their ideas off the ground. So in short, that's what we did, working with Stockland, and then the City of Perth became involved, and Lottery West, and really about how do we lower that barrier through providing space, mentoring, events, meeting rooms, all the things that people need and usually would have to have quite a high outlay for to get access to, along with access to accelerators and things that move their idea along more quickly. So it's really designed to be a peer-to-peer network, but it's been up and running for 3 years now, Spacecubed, and it's been going really well. We've got our space at 45 St George's Terrace and have recently started operating a space called Sync Labs in Leadable, all designed around how do we broaden the support for entrepreneurs in WA.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of actually going and having a look at the space. It's amazing. It's very cool. A bit cooler than my 1970s office, I'll be honest, but very cool space indeed. So today what we wanted to talk about, and in particular, conscious that the audience is particularly around HR professionals, is talking about creativity and innovation, but really the role that a HR professional can have in this, because I think a lot of people are a little bit hands-off it, a bit concerned. I know myself, I say that I don't have a creative bone in my body, but I'm not sure that's terribly true when we actually start to look at it. Do you have a view, Brody, on why organisations should embrace creativity and innovation? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so we've started seeing, although Spacecubed was originally designed to support entrepreneurs and innovators, there's also sort of entrepreneurs and innovators within larger organisations. So we've started having bigger organisations using Spacecubed where they'll come and they'll set up a team. It could be a cross-department team. It could be a team that's setting up a new product or service to get access to those entrepreneurs and that different sort of thinking. Also a lot of sort of lean thinking where it's about testing, prototyping, really getting things up and running before you've done the full business case in order to test the market for that. So through those processes, it really inspires people. They have to be creative. They have to find new ways of tackling an issue. And now more than ever, organisations are needing to look at how they support innovation and creativity when they're within their organisations, purely because of the external forces they face and, digital technology rapidly increasing the change that all companies are seeing. So we have Uber's one of our members, and within 18 months they've managed to take 10% of the taxi industry in Australia, and a lot of people are talking about sort of the Uberification of everything. So if it's not your industry now, it probably will be soon.
Yep.
So preparing for that and understanding that there's some potential big challenges within your industry. How do you support your own organisation to develop new products and services first?
Yeah, it's very true, and I think those external factors that you were mentioning, I'll be a little bit more blunt. I don't think it would come as a great surprise to anyone who's listening in, just the difficulty in the economic environment that we're facing at the moment. Some of the previous webinars that we talked about being that redundancies is one of the most common query that we're getting, and that businesses are really facing a point in time where they need to look to evolve or to grow or to contract, really a change in the life cycle. And innovation and innovative thinking is a really key part of that. So that's, I guess, what we were talking about when we're talking about innovation. And then the other side of this being, what is HR's role when we're talking about innovation? And I think when I was putting this together, the thing that kept coming back to me is we talk about innovation, we're talking about research and development and technology and collaboration and all these sorts of trendy words, but ultimately it all sort of boils down to people. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. So, Spacecubed is a cool environment, which I think helps creating that environment to inspire people is important. But all that's doing is that's enhanced by the people who are there. So we've got 550 members from a range of industries who are all working on their own, challenges and opportunities in their own way. But that energy sort of feeds off each other, and without the people, it wouldn't work. So I think, providing opportunities for people to develop those skills around prototyping and being creative and innovative and executing on their ideas more quickly is really important.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. We've opened the first poll for the webinar. And that poll is I'm really just wanting to be able to seek some data from the audience about whether or not innovation or looking towards growth in innovation is something that your business is looking at right now. So please feel free to jump in with your opinion on that. So like I said, and like we were talking about, innovation being about people, what I wanted to look at today was our sort of 5 top tips around this. And you know what, it's an arbitrary number. We could make it a lot bigger or a lot smaller than that, but it's really just some of these key things. The first one that I wanted to look at was this idea around HR being innovators, or HR as innovators. And I guess what I wanted to look at was probably address the elephant in the room, which is that HR is not typically thought of as innovators. In actual fact, they're usually thought of as the people that kill innovation through all the rules and regulation and compliance and the things that go with that. And I appreciate that. My background is employee relations, industrial relations advice, so I get paid to tell people about risk. But the thing for HR is to understand that you can, in fact, be a leader in this field and in fact should take a leadership role, particularly given the scope that HR has with respect to looking at culture. Now, culture, in my opinion, needs to be driven from the very top, and I appreciate that, but HR has an ability in a very technical sense to influence how culture is addressed in a company. So some of my key ideas around this is, firstly, this idea about leading from example, addressing those misconceptions, and sometimes I mean addressing them face on, in terms of acknowledging that perhaps you might be the innovation killer at times, but it's also about understanding sometimes what your technical role requires of you can be left at the door when you're wanting to have a conversation around ideas. Asking questions. HR has, generally speaking, a very unique opportunity to work cross-organisationally and actually be the conduit between departments that might not actually realise that they themselves have something in common. And so I think that's a really important role that they can take. And the second thing is, the last point I wanted to make was this idea about giving yourself permission. I think in addressing the fact that HR is often seen as a creativity killer, I think you should, a bit of self-reflection around not falling for that trap, and then actually giving everyone else permission as well. That's the research shows time and time again. You can tell everyone that you want to create an innovative culture, you want a culture of creativity, but if you don't actually empower your employees to do that, it'll never happen. So I've included in that slide just some information out of some studies where only 50% of HR managers in a global study indicated they were working towards an innovation culture, and in the same study 70% of the respondents highlighted that this was an important role for HR. So by way of, I guess, introduction to the topic, I do think this is very much in the scope of a role for a HR professional. I just wanted to touch quickly on the poll result. overwhelming result actually. 90% of you indicated yes, that you are looking towards more innovative thinking. So I think that's illustrative of what we're certainly seeing across the market. So the second thing I wanted to talk about, and really this is Brodie's sweet spot, for want of a better word, is using space. And I guess by way of introduction, I'm really interested in Brodie sharing some of your stories around, you know, you're in the business of space, but it's looking beyond just the physical environment. We touched on this earlier when we talked about people, but understanding how that physical space can then inform and be informed by collaboration and technology, because really it all again boils down to the people component. Did you have any introductory comments with respect to that?
Yeah, so when we opened Spacecubed 3 years ago, and the process we went through to do that was we didn't actually know what people would need from the space. We didn't know what the companies and the startups and the entrepreneurs that were using it would actually require. So we actually started with basically a big empty white space, and then went through a process over about 8 months where we built out the space as people used it with people. So we sort of co-designed and co-developed the space rather than us sort of assuming, you know, what people would need. So through that process, we actually, when we were originally designing the space, it was just going to be sort of hot desks everywhere, so everyone would be able to sit everywhere. And through that co-design process, people were actually giving us the feedback that they wanted they needed their own space as well. So they needed to sort of graduate from sort of hot desks where they can work anywhere to their own permanent desk, to team space. So they needed flexible and different spaces to be able to work in for sort of the different tasks that they were taking on, and the different development levels in their organisation. So through that process, if we hadn't done that, I don't think it actually would have worked. So I think engaging the people who are going to be using the space as early as possible in the development of it makes a big difference, and it definitely made a difference for our organisation. And we make sure that's what we do when we're moving any new projects forward. But not just with the space, also with the programs that are running in the space. So we actually don't run a lot of the events that happen in Spacecubed. So we have a lot of events like Startup Weekend, which runs next month, which is around bringing together 100 people over a 54-hour period. So 30 designers, 30 developers, and 40 people with ideas. And then actually building a product or a service over that weekend. Often it's an app, but we've had lots of different people building different things. But what it forces people to do is sort of get that idea out of their head and into the market much more quickly, and they actually pitch to venture capitalists and judges on the Sunday night. So it's a rapid prototyping of a new idea. But that program it's designed around how do you increase collaboration and sort of force collaboration in an intense amount of time. And then at the same time looking at more structured programs, and this is what we've seen from organisations who come to work in Spacecubed, I think initially probably for the space because it's a more creative, innovative space than they've got access to. But then what we've seen them doing is actually building programs for their own staff, as well as for their own staff, but also to access external expertise in new idea development, new service development. And we've seen that with what RAC's done with RAC Seed Spark, which was designed around providing what are the challenges RAC was facing, what are the opportunities to the broader community, and then actually providing a program that people go through and pitch for seed funding for their idea. So things like that which engage externally but also engage your internal staff in new ways of thinking, I think are really important. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key, it's so interesting. One of the key takeaway messages is the ability that you can use, you can look at a potential business growth idea and get a second use out of it as well, which is equally important, which is a staff engagement tool. And we'll come to talk about talent management next, and I think that's really where we can hit the nail on the head there. So when we were looking at this idea of space, it sort of came down to sort of three broader themes around the space, looking at space to stimulate ideas. So we were just mentioning earlier the importance of flexibility in the design and how important it was that you actually engaged with the people who were going to use the space. I think, yeah, that's a really important takeaway message. If in a business you're thinking about it, you've got a blank room or a blank wall or a corner or something and you're thinking, hopefully you're inspired by us today and you think, okay, let's see what we can do with this space. it's probably and I think it is a really important takeaway message and maybe actually using this as a collaboration opportunity to actually see how people would use the space, because there would be nothing worse in investing in creating a space that people then don't use because you haven't quite got the scope right. So that's really important. Probably the other thing I think that might be worth addressing is unfortunately there's a bit of a perception of these sorts of ideas being nice to haves rather than must haves at the moment. Have you got any feedback or ideas on how people could do this and maybe minimise the financial investment or demonstrate a return on investment from doing something like that?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different opportunities, but I think that sort of new service or new product design should be core to your business. I think in Western Australia we had to not worry about it as much because our business as usual has generally worked for a long time. But if you're not sort of refining your existing products and services or you're not developing new ones, you're going to run into a lot of trouble there. So I think that there's, like I mentioned, things like Startup Weekend where you could send your team along to that sort of thing. What we're seeing from some of the mining companies, they're investing in Unearthed, which is a mining technology hackathon, which is that sort of weekend-long event, as well as an accelerator. So they'll invest, get access to new talent, new ideas, new innovation, but for them relatively small investment compared to what their sort of R&D would normally be doing, but very quick turnaround. So what we've seen through that sort of program, which the first round had BHP and Rio Tinto as part of it, the second round had Luca Resources, and so some bigger West Australian organisations or bigger players in Western Australia. And basically what we saw through that was I think it was 15 new ideas developed over a weekend and then able to be invested in. But it was for relatively small investment that these organisations get access to often people who haven't worked in their industry before but have a different perspective on their ideas, but also exposing their staff to those new ideas through mentoring and those sort of opportunities. So I think that those sort of events are a relatively low cost way to get access to sort of new innovation and new ideas. The other part of it is purely through, we have, so for example, we have IINet have a team in Spacecubed of 8 people working on one of their projects. Landgate have a team of their staff working in Spacecubed and have space for any of their staff to come through and work. But I think it's really about, how do you access a different environment that has a lot of people who are already sort of running at a certain pace to show that this stuff can be done really quickly and for pretty low cost.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think we sort of touched on this, the importance of actually appreciating. There's a bit of a misconception, and I certainly had it in preparing for it. I did make a gag about it being a hippie commune that Brady didn't think was as funny as I did. But there's a misconception that a creative space is just open plan and sitting on bean bags and playing foosball tables, but it's quite important. We're talking about people who are wanting to create businesses here. There's some privacy that needs to go with that, right?
Yeah, so I think a lot of our space is open plan, but we also have closed meeting rooms. There's opportunities for phone booths for phone calls and things like that. And also when you come into Spacecubed, you see that people are pretty focused on what they're doing. We create opportunities through the kitchen and there's couches and things like that for people to have conversations. But when people are sitting down and working, they're really focused. So it's about building a culture where, people are getting stuff done. And, when they're talking with other people, it's visible. You can see new collaborations are happening and new things are going to come from that. So I think it's the privacy element now is really interesting. And also we have a lot of questions about IP and what do you do with your IP? Do you not tell anyone your ideas? But the challenge is now the world's moving so quickly, especially the digital world, which a lot of the people in Spacecubed work in, that to go into that sort of patent scenario where a lot of it you can't anyway, you're better off executing. So execution is your sort of IP protection. The quicker you can get your product to market and get a certain market share, the better off your sales and customers, the better off you'll be. So that's the way that we've sort of approached it. And we get lots of questions about this when you have someone stand up in front of 100 people and pitch their idea. How will someone steal that idea? And the reality is everyone else there's working on their own ideas. And if they execute quicker than you, then you're doing something wrong. So I think it's that open mindset where if you don't share your idea, people can't help you with that. but the different spaces facilitate that.
Yeah, it's true, and it's a really important cultural comment too, of applying that mindset in an organisation where people might be reluctant to share ideas for someone taking the credit or doing, and really it's creating a culture where that just doesn't mean anything. So sort of undermining that sort of negative behaviour before it even takes place. Probably the only other observation I would make about if you're looking at creating a creative environment and making sure it's not just an environment that's completely open plan, is also appreciating that people work in different ways. So there's lots of studies around the difference between extroverted and introverted behaviour, and also understanding that some people are just more sensitive to an environment than someone else. So it comes back to that flexibility again. The last part of it is then this idea of sharing and looking at, and this is something, especially in more conservative or traditional organisations where there's lots of offices and lots of very high-walled cubicles, of understanding what you might be missing out on in terms of particularly collaboration and cross-team collaboration. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. I think you've probably benefited from that in that environment.
Yeah, so, the amount of what we look at is how do we create bump-in points for people so that they can get focused work done when they need to, but then also have the opportunity through events and breakfasts and lunches and learning, lunchtime learning sessions and a whole range of different opportunities to learn something new or interact with other people. And because you see that through those interactions, new ideas develop and new ideas emerge, and I think that's the whole goal of what Spacecubed's there to do, is that cross-fertilisation of ideas, where you have some people from Landgate working with some entrepreneurs who are doing app development, then different people working on all sorts of different ideas in the one space. So I think that we probably don't appreciate enough how important that is for moving ideas forward, and it's really something that we've made sure that we create those opportunities for people, because they don't just sort of organically happen. I think if people sort of left to their own devices, and we had this in the first sort of 12 months, they will just go and sit down, put their headphones on and go to work and, not interact. So you've got to be pretty structured about how you do provide those opportunities for people. And that's where the sort of, that sort of light touch sort of things, where there's the kitchen where everyone has to go to, plus events and things that happen in there. But the more structured projects around those sort of weekend-long events which force collaboration from different teams, accelerators which are over 3 months, which create a structured environment for people to move their ideas forward. So having different levels of opportunity for people to interact and find out what they don't know it's key to spaces like this working.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important theme that comes across throughout all of the different tips that we're talking about today, is this balance between creativity doesn't just mean throwing like random things at a wall and seeing what sticks. It's about looking at the importance of discipline around creativity and structure around creativity, and that's where I think human resources teams and professionals can actually play a really active role in that, because they can facilitate the structure in order to create that opportunity.
And it's one of the things we've seen where it's I'm sure most people would have had their boss or come down from management something like, oh, we need more ideas, then sort of an open call for ideas goes out. They get hundreds of ideas, but then nothing actually happens with them. And I think that's even more demotivating for staff when you've actively engaged them in this idea creation and they put out their ideas, but then nothing happens with it. And I think the next time they probably won't put their ideas out there. So having a way that actually moves those ideas forward, I think it's the easy part's asking for ideas, and ideas are generally pretty easy.
Yeah.
You can brainstorm a bunch of ideas very quickly, but it's that execution element of it and that testing that, is this going to work, and doing that in a quick way and turning that around into a new product or service or efficiency gain in your business that otherwise, I don't think, it could do more damage than good if it's poorly managed, these programs.
No, it's so true. So the next area I just wanted to touch on was, look, it's as broad a topic as any, so I just broke it down into what I thought were some key elements around this, and this is talent management and how HR can engage in a conversation around a culture of innovation by looking at probably 3 areas that they have a lot of control over. So firstly, this is about attraction and retention strategies, then looking at reward and recognition, and then lastly looking at embracing diversity. Now, there's lots of things we can talk about it, but they only gave me 45 minutes. So one of the things I wanted to touch on was probably this idea, and we can talk about the fact that, economic environment is challenging at the moment, that it's easier to tap into the labour pool than it was previously. But I can't advocate firmly enough that it doesn't matter what economic environment we're in, it is always going to be hard to find the right talent, and particularly talent who are going to think innovatively, drive growth, or look at evolution of your business. So that's where I think looking at talent acquisition and recruitment strategies, and actually looking towards recruiting or having recruitment questions that test around innovation and creative thinking is really important. We don't need to go straight to, some of the quite high profile and famous Google interview questions that you get. You don't need to go straight there, but looking at how you're engaging with recruitment from a graduate point of view. There's plenty of opportunities through internships. At CCI we actually have we're facilitating a really great program called Work Integrated Learning, which partners with university students during the last couple of years of their degrees, and also looking at social media and actually just being a little bit more open-minded to a typical, CCAD, not that there's anything wrong with that, but looking beyond just typical recruitment strategies to make sure you are recruiting talent into an organisation that's going to engage with this sort of culture and actually start to influence it. I would imagine you would see something similar like that in the startup community.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because usually in the startup community it's based around sort of equity shares of the new business you're creating. So there's a strong motivator there that you own part of the business in some way. I think what's going to be interesting over the next few years, and it's probably something a number of people are seeing in their organisations, is there are people with ideas who now will probably go out and set up their own idea on their own rather than within the business. So I think finding a way to provide the opportunity for them to set up those new ideas within the current business rather than splintering out and leaving and setting it up on their own, because that's potentially the new sort of value generators for your company. So I think there's a structured way to be able to do that where they can set up their own teams, and that's a reward mechanism as well. As if you're having really good ideas, then people will support you, the organisation will support you to actually get that up and running.
And I swear it's not, this was actually not scripted, but it segues very nicely into the next area, which is reward and recognition. And this is a key part of it, and around whether, like, if you're looking to create a culture that behaves, innovatively, do you have any structure in place to actually reward and recognise such behaviour? We actually have a second poll that I'd like to put up. While we're talking around this idea, which is to actually see whether or not businesses listening in today actually have any formal structures in place for reward and recognition. I guess by way of introduction, I've just included some sort of quite generic ideas around reward and recognition, but did you want to expand on what you were saying? So one of the areas being actually rewarding people personal sort of recognition around that and supporting them in their personal endeavours. What are some of the other things that you've seen in that sort of space?
Yeah, I think personal is one side of it, but also, often if they're working in a business, they'll be passionate about what you're actually working on. And they'll see new ways that things can be done. So it's how do you support them to actually pursue that within your current business? So I think that's a key thing, and how are they rewarded for doing that rather than going out and setting up on their own. I think the reward and recognition side of things is really important to keep people engaged. And again, I think it comes back to something we haven't really had to think a lot about. And people have sort of got their salaries and got their bonuses, but what's going to keep sort of Gen Y employees engaged wouldn't be the same as in the past. So I think, providing opportunities for them to engage in things they really enjoy doing, but also add value to the business are going to be key to moving forward strategies around awards and recognition. I think there's a number of different compensation strategies to do that, but having some sort of structure that people can tap into, and also promoting that out to the organisation and to the community more broadly is important.
Yeah, thanks, Brady. We've actually got the results from the poll. Interesting results, I think. 88% of the audience said they have no formal program strategy in place for actually rewarding or recognising innovative behaviour or ideas at work. So I think that's an interesting takeaway message too, that there's perhaps a disconnect there. If businesses are looking to create a culture like this, then there needs to be some structure around that. Now, that structure doesn't, in my opinion, need to be financially based. Sometimes the best way, and this is also the importance of understanding that reward and recognition beyond just innovation is around tapping into what motivates an individual employee. So firstly, managers and team leaders need to be engaged in this conversation because they're the ones that should know their staff, and they should be having those one-on-one conversations to work out what's going to make someone tick. Some silly high performers just like to be given more work, whereas others want more flexibility. They may perhaps want time to work on their own ideas. They might want to be involved in stretch assignments or cross-organisational opportunities. So it's really important as a part of an engagement strategy with this is empowering your managers and leaders to have those conversations with individual employees. So we have a question that I think would be really interesting. I'd be really interested if you have any ideas around this as well, which is, what do you recommend if the executive team are not open or willing to engage with innovation and moving in that direction? It's a really interesting question, and like I said at the outset, it's very hard to affect any cultural change if it's not being driven from the top. But if there is a strategic imperative to move in this direction, I think there are some subtle strategies you can put in place to try and persuade someone to your way of thinking, and one of the most effective ways of doing that is success stories, in my opinion. Dollar signs, being able to show return on investment, I think that's a really influencing motivator. What about yourself? Do you have any?
I think the key to it is starting small. So start really small with a specific project and something that would be considered high value for the organisation. So if you can solve this some way, then it's going to produce real dollars or real savings, and then focus all your energy on that and putting some sort of structure around solving that challenge. And then using that as the case study to get executives on board. I think that's really the only way you can do it. We've seen all sorts of things where people have brought in their 500-page innovation strategy, and it just doesn't work. You need to actually be doing this stuff. It's a contact sport, innovation and creativity. It's not about writing the document and writing up what the plan is around it. So that way you can start small. Often you'll spend less on the small project than you would on paying a consultant or someone to write up the plan for it. So I think that's the key thing, is identify a real pain point in your business now or in your organisation now. Put some resources around and some sort of structure around generating new ideas and supporting those ideas, having some sort of competitive process or whatever it might be to select the ideas, or some sort of collaborative process so that all staff are engaged in coming up with those new ideas or selecting the one that is going to be utilised, and then putting that to work. So yeah, I can't really see doing the big plan. I don't think will work, and getting the early runs on the board. You'll learn a lot because you'll learn how to do it in a pretty risk-free environment because it is only a small project, and then you'll be able to apply those learnings to the next bigger one once you've got executives on board.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, Brady. I'm completely going to pinch that analogy of innovation being a contact sport. That's officially made it into my repertoire. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That a small win is so much more tangible. And I think that goes to one of the comments we made at the outset, is how important it is as leaders to actually empower your employees and give them permission. That's a really important part of it. I think that's really important. So the last one I was looking at in terms of talent management was looking at embracing diversity, and it wasn't intended to be a shameless plug for our upcoming edition of our Business Pulse magazine, but I actually happen to have written an article about it that's going about. And part of it is part of my whole preface is this is such an important area because, and we're not just talking diversity in the typical sense of those characteristics that you often think about in terms of age or gender or background, but it's broader than that in terms of someone's previous work experiences or where they've come from or what influences them, and it boils down to the most simple idea in the world, which is that innovation can thrive in an environment where you put people with differing points of view in a room to discuss it. While there may be some instinctive behaviour of wanting to surround yourself with people who think like you, and often that happens, you want to surround yourself with think like you and behave like you and come from where you come from and look like you, you limit your ability to think more broadly and more competitively if you surrounded yourself with you. As much as I like myself, pretty healthy ego over here, I certainly appreciate the competitive advantage you can get from putting people in a room who actually will have completely differing points of view, and there's lots of studies around this in terms of understanding your own market better, making sure that your leadership team reflects the market that you actually want to look at. There's some really high profile examples of companies who have and I'm not targeting anyone in particular, but especially the group of male executives who are selling product to the 90% market of women, and it going completely belly up because no one thought to ask the person who's going to use the product. Examples like that, where that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about embracing diversity. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, so I think our whole space sort of works off diversity. If you didn't have diverse people working together on new ideas, I just don't think it would work. An interesting one in Australia at the moment is the number of people with some sort of tech background or technical background, where they set up an apps company or some sort of big technology company, and the number of people on boards who have that sort of background. I think that's going to be a big challenge moving forward, is if you don't have people on your board from a leadership position driving that sort of technology change, then when your industry is probably going through some sort of transformation through technologies at some point in the next sort of 15 years, that's going to be a challenge. And I think that diversity of skill sets on boards, as well as across businesses, is going to be really important. But yeah, the diversity, I don't think the innovation piece, the best outcomes we've seen from those bigger events are when it's someone who has no background experience working on a problem in a field they've never worked in before, and the novel new ways they come up with looking at the challenges of that industry. So yeah, it's really key to, I think, making the whole thing work.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really important insight too, in appreciating that diversity is not defined. So that example of saying the importance of having diversity in a leadership team who actually really understand and embrace the importance of the evolution of technologies is vital, and something that can be overlooked. So the next area that I wanted to talk about in terms of my top 5 tips was to mention training. And when I put it in here, I sort of and ahed to myself a little bit to say, well, really the most important thing you can say is training. The reason I've included it is because of this mindset that, and I mentioned it earlier, of some people are creative and some people are not. And I would like to challenge that assumption. I actually think most people are inherently creative, but it's the discipline and the execution of creative and innovative thinking that can be developed. And there are some, and the Perth market does have a number of providers that provide training around innovative thinking. It's also something that an L&D team or a HR professional with a training background could probably develop an internal program that's just going to foster cross-organisational thinking that is just a little bit different. The other part of it for me too was looking at actually the importance of understanding diversity and cross-cultural awareness and that sort of training, and then training and coaching for leaders. And the reason I identify training and coaching for leaders in particular is because your leaders need to be able to empower employees on a day-to-day basis to actually make sure that this learning is being embedded, so that your employees are not going to ever feel like they've been given permission if your leaders aren't carrying these sorts of mantras through their day-to-day thinking. And sometimes that does involve coaching particularly, and I guess that goes back to that question that we had earlier about how do you do this if the executive's not on board, or if there's a particular person who thinks it's all just a waste of time. And that's where, as a HR professional, you most commonly work with your managers and your leaders and can provide coaching around that to really embed that thinking over time. I would imagine training something that comes up quite a bit at Spacecubed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably just wouldn't get the opportunity in their day-to-day job to, they're busy doing what they're there to do rather than coming up with new ideas, or they're busy doing what's on their job description or whatever it might be. So I think that opportunity, and then it's that permission to actually do something differently and come up with some new ideas and then do something with them is important. I think the creative innovation thinking development, I think it's sort of moved beyond that now. Like there's lots of things like universities do courses on entrepreneurship and that sort of thing, but usually they're about entrepreneurship. It's not how to do and how to actually get started doing things. So I think the opportunity now is actually to, there's lots of frameworks that you can use to actually get started. And even if it is in a small way, it's about, how do you get started as quickly as possible for the lowest cost to get your, to engage people, engage the organisation, even engage people outside the organisation like customers and suppliers. And actually take them on that journey. The training piece is important, but I think it's really a move towards that sort of action learning and learning through actually doing the creativity and innovation piece.
Yeah, no, that's great. The last thing, and I appreciate that the overarching topic for today is looking at culture, but I wanted to address culture as its own, and looking at, and what I've included here in this slide is just some dot points around some of the things that I think are really important when we're talking about culture. And firstly, yes, we're really addressing the opportunity that HR might be able to have in this, but it's really important to appreciate that culture as its own little topic is everyone's responsibility. So driven from the top, yes, HR has a very important role in it, particularly about being able to give it structure, but it's something that everyone can contribute to. So one of the things, and it's one of those areas where it's such a big topic that I think everyone's a bit paralysed as to what they can do to affect it. And I think it's just important, if in terms of a coaching opportunity for a HR professional, to actually say and embed that idea that it is everyone's responsibility. So the action of one person can actually start to affect cultural change. It might be slow, but it is important to appreciate it is everyone's responsibility. Give people permission, and it's okay to fail. That's an important thing to address, and we've touched on it a couple of times. The fear of failure can be paralysing to an organisation, particularly organisations where everyone's in the game of risk. And so I think what you were saying earlier about touching on or picking a small project and just getting, letting everyone have the chance to walk before they can, crawl before they can walk, or walk before they can run, actually having the leadership team empower people to try without a fear that if they fail, they'll lose their job as a result. Would you agree?
Yeah, so especially in the startup culture, it's about how do you set up what you're doing and get to market as quickly as possible for the lowest amount of money, essentially. Yeah. How do you get some sort of impact? They call it a minimum viable product. So what's the minimum amount of development you can do in order to get a product to market and start testing it with people? And because you've spent so little in most cases, then failing isn't a big thing. But the challenge you have in bigger organisations is if you've spent, 10, 15, $20 million on a project, it's almost too big by that point that you can't let it fail. Like there's too many vested interests, there's too many people engaged in that process. So I think by starting small and providing people with that framework where you can fail at this as long as you sort of learn from that failing and then execute, because often that failing, you'll learn something from that, and then it'll be the next project you're working on. It could be that sort of next big product or service or productivity gain. But there's one, Pollinizer, which is a startup incubator in Sydney, talks about flirning, which is failing but learning, and that's okay. So everyone can use that word if they want. Maybe not with your exec team in the first meeting.
Instance, yeah. And I think there's embracing flirning. That's a really important part of, if you empower your workforce to try something, if it doesn't work, just make sure, and this comes to structure, if you're going to set something up, make sure you come back to it and sort of debrief what, actually focus on the learnings that you can take away from it, because often what can happen is if something hasn't worked, then everyone just sort of pretends like it's never happened, we'll never discuss it again, we just turn the light off and walk away. I think it's really important structurally to make sure, if you're looking at a project or an idea to get off the ground, that you do some project analysis at different points to actually make sure you capture those learnings. It's just little steps like that that are really important to actually make sure you get the most out of it. And then that's where you'll start to see a cultural change. The same way, it's really important that I think one of the biggest creativity stiflers that we see is that the first position's no, and then you have to work back from that. I think what's really important, especially in the initial stage of idea generation, is that no is just a word that you can't engage. No is really important when it comes to execution, but when we're just throwing things down on a piece of paper or on a board or whatever mechanism you're looking at, that initial no, you just need to hold on to it. Now, my job's risk, so that's very confronting for me to do. As soon as someone talks to me about something, I tell them all the reasons not to do it. But culturally, that's actually really, it's not very effective.
And there's a few tools you can use to sort of reduce that risk, and there's things like the business model canvas and the lean canvas, which basically is your business plan on one page and shows, how is this, it sort of breaks down how is this new project actually going to work. But what it does is means everyone can see the same thing. They don't have to read the big documents and work out, right, let's move this around. How is this going to work? How do we do it quickly? And sort of get to the yes more quickly, and rather than putting that through a sort of risk management framework from the beginning, say, no, this is our prototype, this is our test, our pilot, this is, it's low risk, let's give it a shot, rather than it being shut down before it's even really begun. Because we talk about startups being, it's exploration vehicle basically to find a business. A startup and a new idea and a new project isn't actually a business or in itself. It's about finding what the business is going to be, and therefore sometimes it's not going to work, or it'll transform or change into something else, and that's okay. But I think as long as everyone knows that that's going to happen and that's the process, so that a lot of investment doesn't go up front in a new idea when it hasn't been proven with the market or with customers or internally. I think that sort of sets you up for failure when everyone's on board with that idea, and then to change that idea is almost too tough.
Yep, no, I think that's great. So the other area I wanted to touch on when we're talking about culture is the importance of values. So when we come to talk about values, a lot of people think about values about a piece of paper on a page, or a document that's put in a frame and put next to the lift or something like that. But why it's so important is it's about setting those expectations. So if you want to put innovation in your values, then you need to make sure that the behaviours and the expectations that you're setting around that say the same things. And there's a really good example when we actually come to talk about, I'll just touch very briefly on Netflix, which is a very high profile example of innovation cultural change. One of the things that they noticed was if they were trying to create a culture, or they were working with a business that was trying to create a culture of efficiency and innovation. And then the managing director of the company turned around and was late to a meeting because he was playing foosball before the meeting started. And he said, well, should you finish the game, or should you go to the meeting on time? And the director said, well, no, I'm going to finish the game. We encourage flexibility and adaptability in the company. And they're like, yes, but your main value is efficiency. How is it going to be efficient if you're making people late? And I thought it was just a really simple example of how values and expectations can sometimes misalign without even realising it, because you're trying to achieve so much so quickly. And I think you just need to make sure that in establishing values, if you want to establish a value of innovation in your business, then how do you then translate that into behaviours and expectations, because values will mean different things to different people, so it's more important than just having a piece of paper. It's translating that piece of paper into something meaningful for the business. So I've included some information just on the slide here about Netflix, and they had this really leading edge idea around how they were going to shape their organisational culture. And if you've read anything about it, as I understand it, it went viral. There's been over 5 million views of their slide deck. And things like their employees can choose their own leave and how much leave they want to take, things like that. Now, that's not the sort of extreme example that most businesses are going to go to, but the principles that they were looking at was to hire, reward and tolerate only fully formed adults, which I think most people would be pretty okay with that. Tell the truth about performance. Managers own the job of creating great teams. Leaders own the job of creating the company culture, and good talent managers think like business people and innovators first. Probably some of the key takeaways for me, and I'd be interested, Brody, on your view, telling the truth about performance. Being someone who comes from an IR background, I appreciate how this is quite a nerve-wracking and an area that can be quite confronting in terms of balancing that with compliance. But that really, in my view, I think some of the takeaway messages around that is looking how you can use not just performance management in a bad sense when there's a poor performance issue, but the importance of looking at really good performance as well, and that feedback about good performance shouldn't just be done once a year as a part of a formalised and largely disliked formal appraisal system. And the other side about that is the importance of managers owning the job of creating great teams and making sure that managers are empowered to do their job as managers, because being a manager is a technical skill set of its own. What about yourself, Brody? Did you have any observations on what Netflix wanted to create in terms of their organisational culture?
Just more broadly on the using innovation in your values, because I think it'd be interesting to find out how many companies actually have innovation as one of their values. But when you actually drill down and ask, like, what are you doing to deliver on that? It often, you get sort of blank stares sort of thing. So either it hasn't been communicated from the top what's being done, or there's just nothing being done.
There's nothing behind it. Yeah, exactly.
So I think being able to deliver, and values like this within your organisation mean that it's sort of driving that performance, and it has a tangible way of, through having those values that Netflix has, they'll get new innovative products out of that, because it's set a certain standard on, having managers think like business people and innovators sort of forces that if you're not going to be doing that, then it's probably not the right place, that organisation. So I think it really forces people into that position where it's about building the business, it's about building new business units, new products, new services, or getting better at what you're currently doing. I think that's where values really kick into it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so I'd encourage the audience, if you haven't already done so, to actually have a look at the Netflix slide deck. There's some really interesting articles around that. You just need to Google Netflix reinventing HR. We'll maybe include a link in the follow-up email that will come out after this to have a read of it in your own time. It's quite immense. I think there's like 127 slides, so it's something to do in your spare time. The last thing I wanted to look at when we talk about value, a culture, is creating infrastructure, and we've touched on this a few times, and it's particularly important around the idea that HR can influence this, particularly around systems and infrastructure. And there's quite a lot of examples, even in the WA market, of businesses actually creating sort of quasi research and development or voluntary innovation groups or councils or committees that are cross-organisational, use a diverse range of employees to actually sort of create some structure around idea generation in a business. Have you seen this much? I think Landgate's a leader in this area.
They do, but probably the key thing where I think Landgate's made it work is they have a budget line item attached to it as well, whereas often what you'll see in organisations is the committee will be set up but won't be resourced to actually do anything, which is a big challenge when, they're meant to be sort of the champions of innovation and driving new ideas and driving that cultural change, but can't actually test anything, whereas Landgate actually they're investing in both their staff externally and in new systems in order to manage that innovation and manage new ideas through to execution. So I think you can start small, but there still needs to be something attached to, otherwise, what isn't, managed isn't, what isn't measured isn't managed, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's...
And it forces accountability as well around
it's a very important point.
Achieving something. So.
Yeah, no, hugely. I couldn't agree more. So just appreciate there was sort of starting to head towards the time where they'll wrap me up and cut me off. So just touching on the sort of, as in a summary sense, the 5 things that I thought will probably take away messages for people today. The first being HR as innovators, and the fact that there's a really influential role that HR can have in this process. The use of space, talent management, training and culture. Did you have any, closing remarks on touching on any of those themes today?
No, I think I think it really comes down to execution. So, testing new ways of driving that innovation within your organisation. I think there's lots of opportunities to do this, and there's lots of easy ways to get involved in things that are happening in Spacecubed and more broadly in the startup community for both your staff, but also to access new ideas that could be the next thing for your industry. We have open house on Friday mornings, so anyone can come along and use the space and try it out. But also we're working with a number of organisations like sort of RAC and AMCOM around building out those programs as well, so that there is that structure and access to external people around ideas, but also to build more structure internally around innovation.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I guess my closing comments around that is I couldn't agree with Brady more. Execution is the key. You can call it whatever you want. Execution, discipline, structure. Everyone has the opportunity to be creative, but that's actually not true. There are not creative bones and non-creative bones. Everyone inherently has the ability to think and behave innovatively or creatively, but it's the competitive advantage, in my opinion, is the structure or the discipline or the execution around that. And that's, I truly believe, where HR can influence that process. You don't need to have rules for rules' sake, but some sort of structure around that is vitally important. So I've included our details on the slides today if you wanted to get in contact with Brady or myself, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look and see some of the fantastic work that's happening at Spacecubed. Did you have any final comments?
No, I think probably the key thing is, starting now, so getting people within your organisation to just get started on this. Start with that small, what's the low-hanging fruit challenges and opportunities, and then just get started. It's things aren't going to slow down. Things will keep getting faster and faster, and that rate of change is going to get faster and faster. So I think putting in place the structures to be able to, produce new products and services at that same rate is going to be crucial for any businesses to really be successful over the next sort of 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, great. Well, perfect. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Brady, for joining the webinar. Like I said, we'll send a follow-up of this, but if you've got any questions that you want to ask after the session, please feel free to get in contact with either of us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.